bring
Great. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to another evening of Earth Speaks, hosted by First Unitarian Congregation of Ottawa. Our involvement in environmental issues is driven by the seventh Unitarian principle, respect for the web of existence of which we are all a part. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I'll make our climate acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are living in a climate crisis where decisions and actions taken in the next several years will determine the trajectory for humankind. Recently, renowned naturalist David Attenborough said that we cannot be too radical when addressing climate change. So with that as our background, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. Gabriella Kalapos has advocated for local government action on advancing sustainable communities for more than 25 years through her work at the Toronto Environmental Alliance, ICLEI, Cities for Climate Protection Campaign, and currently as Executive Director of the Clean Air Partnership. Her focus has been to encourage, support, and monitor implementation of clean air and climate change actions, and to build partnerships that enable collaboration among communities and all levels of government. Gabriella has a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Geography from Concordia University and a master's degree in Environmental and Business Studies from the University of Waterloo. Welcome, Gabriella, and I'll just mention the flow for this evening's talk. Gabriella is going to present shortly, and then we'll have a formal question and answer session after her speaking that goes up to about 8 o'clock. And from then we'll knock off the recording and just have it informal. So questions during the formal session, please put them in chat. I'll combine them, moderate them, and during the formal question session before 8 o'clock, ask them to Gabriella. So with that, Gabriella, please take it away. And again, welcome.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it, and thank you all for inviting me today, and for joining tonight. And I hope it's going to be a good dialogue. Please don't be shy about asking questions. This is meant to be a bit of a dialogue back and forth, and so you don't need to wait till the end of the presentation. If you have questions that you'd like to ask, please do bring that in. I have a bit of a presentation that I'll share with you, just a little bit on the stories, but I might go on to tangents, just so you know. It just kind of happens every once in a while. And I'm really quite excited by this. I actually say that one of the things that I wanted to share as well is that the Unitarian Church is actually quite close to my heart. My kids went to the Unitarian camp just up near Honeywood, near Collingwood in Ontario. And they went there since they were, one of my best friends was running the camp up there, and we spent a lot of time in the summertime. And I used to call it the off-leash zone for the kids, because it was one of the few places that they could run wild. And the only two rules they had to adhere to is, one, no one goes near the pond without an adult. That was the one rule. If they wanted to run free like a wild pack of wolves, they had to follow one rule: no one goes near the pond without any adults. And the second rule was no person gets left behind. You run as a pack and you never leave anyone behind. And they adhered to those rules, and then they would run through the Unitarian camp like a pack of wolves in different locations, often raiding people's campsites. Thankfully, it was one of their parents' campsites. So it is really near and dear to my heart. So if you could just bear with me for 1 second, I'm just going to pull the PowerPoint slide up. Right. So really, this is a little bit of a kind of like a kind of pathway. what does our net zero, like what does a net zero community look like? And how do we, and where are we now? And where do we need to go? And then what's the pathway we need to adhere to in order to get to that destination? I also wanted to kind of add, one of the things that I think is kind of like, well, we'll get into this a little bit more, but one of the things that I think is really key on this one is that change is scary for people. And this is going to be a big change that we're going through that on this one. But if we actually helped people create a better visualization of what these net zero emission communities look like and how they function, I really do think we would alleviate some of the concern or fear, the fear of change issues, because if we could create a better visualization for them, for us, I think we would all want to live there right now. We wouldn't be so scared of it. It would be someplace we'd be like, that's where I want to live. So I'll give a bit of background. I've been working with the Clean Air Partnership for going on about 20 years now. We're a charitable environmental organization, and really our main modus operandi is to help municipalities and their various partners implement clean air and climate change actions. Not only implement them, but increase the ambition of their clean air and climate change action, and scale up the implementation of their clean air and climate change actions. And one of the key ways we go about trying to achieve that goal is anytime a municipality does a clean air or climate change action, we get them to share what they've done with all the other municipalities. And then that lessons get shared across the network. We also then ask, okay, if one of you can do it, what would stop all of you from doing it? And then based on that kind of analysis of bringing a collective brain power together, we help to kind of identify the barriers, the questions, the issues that everybody's facing. And there's always lots of questions, issues, and barriers that we're all facing on this one. And then based on that, we try and pool resources so that we don't have to duplicate efforts across municipalities. And in addition, as each municipality advances and implements that action, they build on what the other previous municipality did. And then they come back to the collective and they share what they've learned on that, lessons learned, so that the collective knowledge building is being grown over time. So, well, I don't need to tell any of you people on this one why we need to go on this one. The pressure is on us now. We've procrastinated for so long. And if I can just share, let me just see if I can pull this one up. So I'm going to just check it out and see how this goes on to it. But it does kind of show, let me just see, where is it going now? Oh, here we go. It did work. Okay. So if I can just show, this is the paths not taken. So this is based on it when we first started kind of saying, like, if we had started acting instead of delaying it. And I blame the fossil fuel companies for their misinformation and the propaganda they've passed in terms of their fears about that has kind of slowed created misinformation, slowed the pathway on that one. So you can see the steepness of this slide we have to do in our transition from where we are right now to where we need to be in terms of getting to net zero emissions. And you can see the steepness of it and how that and the implications of that are on that one as well. So let me just stop that one. And I'm going to go back to my slides. All right. So that's one of the things. We've been procrastinating for a while. We no longer have time to procrastinate on this one. We really need to get the implementation happening. And the municipalities have been really, really keen on this one in terms of developing climate action plans. And all government levels of government have been developing climate action plans. Where we've fallen short is on the implementation of these plans. Now, there's lots of reasons that are creating barriers for this one, but ultimately, no longer can we just create plans that we don't implement. And that's really in terms of it, in order to truly implement the climate change action plans that municipalities are advancing in all levels of government. Well, actually, I'm going to say most levels of government. Some levels of government are not really actually here at the table fighting the good fight. In fact, they're going a little bit on the opposite direction on that one, but that was my little bit of a kind of session on that one. So there is an element of it, but really what it comes down to it, in order for the scale up of these actions, individual actions are absolutely imperative. They are critical, critical, critical. And as we take all of our individual actions, it helps to build up our expectation on what others will need to be doing. So individual actions do help building collective action on that one. But individuals cannot change the systemic challenges that we're facing on this one. This is critically where we need governments and the private sector to work together, because there's systematic changes that we need to make in the system. You can do what you want to improve energy efficiency in your, let's say, your home, but you don't control how the energy is, your electricity is produced. That's something that's a systemic change that we need to address across our society to truly be able to achieve the ambitious goals that we have. So I did want to highlight, you know, in school, all of us learn about the water cycle, and we learn, okay, so water evaporates from the ocean, it evaporates from the lakes, it goes into the atmosphere, goes up high into the sky, gets cooler, and then falls as precipitation, or depending on the time of year and the temperature, snow, ice, whatever kind of comes down to it, lands on the ground. If it's permeable surfaces, it makes it into the permeable surfaces. If it's impermeable surfaces, it can lead to flood issues in our urban areas because our stormwater system is overflowed. And we recognize, and we understand the water cycle because we can see it and we can see its impacts. And that's absolutely critical to understand the water cycle. But I also wanted to kind of highlight, there's a carbon cycle it's like just as inherent a part of the Earth systems that we have to learn to respect and live within, that we never really quite learn in school. And that's one of the things that I think is a bit of an issue. So like, I kind of encourage that there's any one thing you could take out of this, learn a little bit more about the carbon cycle, do some digging into it. And I put in some kind of YouTube link that you can kind of go into to start out with this one. But ultimately, I think it's quite interesting because it's a miraculous, like, I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it, the carbon cycle as the Earth's climate regulation system. Just like we have an internal regulation, temperature regulation system that our body creates, the carbon cycle is the Earth climate and temperature regulation system. And if you can indulge me in a little bit of geology geekiness, I would love to kind of take you on a little tour of the long carbon cycle as well as the short carbon cycle. So most of us are aware of the short carbon cycle. That's often the one we considered like, okay, plants take in carbon dioxide and they give us oxygen. And then animals, we take in the oxygen and we give them carbon dioxide. It's a really quite virtuous cycle when you really stop and think about that. And that is considered the short carbon cycle because it takes place on a few seconds. It takes place over a year's time period, but it's a kind of quick carbon cycle. What also happens is there is a long carbon cycle. Now, the long carbon cycle that is traditionally the norm of how the Earth has regulated its climate has been based on volcanoes coming up, spewing gases, greenhouse gases and other carbon dioxide into the atmosphere through just kind of radiating its heat coming from the center of the Earth. But when that carbon dioxide builds up in the atmosphere, it builds up carbonic acid, and that carbonic acid falls on the land. When that carbonic acid falls on the land, it erodes the mountains. When that mountain erosion is taking place, it's drawing down CO2 levels. So just as the Earth is spewing greenhouse gases out of the magma from lava and in volcanic activity, mountain erosion or any land erosion is drawing down carbon. And that is the long-term carbon cycle of how the Earth has regulated its temperature over time. The problem is that humans have come into the cycle and started digging up a whole bunch of organic matter that was stored away in the long-term carbon cycle, and we've decided to put it out into the atmosphere, and then that's turning it into the short-term carbon cycle in terms of it actually kind of coming into our system. And that kind of messing with the carbon cycle, and I've dealt with a fair amount of climate change deniers. Often I have a number of them in my family, go figure, which makes for some really good, interesting dinner time conversations. But one of the things they often raise up is that, well, the Earth's climate has changed throughout history. And I was like, you're absolutely right. The Earth's climate has changed all throughout its 4.5 billion years of its lifespan of the Earth here. But every time the Earth's carbon cycle has been messed with, it has never ended well for the life on the Earth at that moment in time. Messing with the carbon cycle messes with the Earth's climate regulatory system, and that creates a huge amount of stress on the living animals and plants and species that are on the Earth at that time. And it often does not end well for the living animals that happen to be around when that carbon cycle gets messed up during the geological history and time period on that one. So one of the things that is absolutely critical when you think about this, you might be wondering, like, okay, so 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3 degrees Celsius. Like, honestly, it doesn't sound like a lot. What's the big deal? Stop stressing so much. Chill out, Gabby. It's not like there's a fair amount of that goes on around at the time too. But I did want to kind of highlight these numbers make a huge difference in terms of the impacts that they are likely to cause, not only humanity, but also all the other species we are lucky enough to share this amazing planet with at this point in time. And I did want to highlight the last time we had an ice age in North America, and the average temperatures were about 5 degrees on average less than they are right now. That 5-degree difference being less than on average, meant that there was over a kilometer of ice exactly where we are living right here, right now. So these small averages make a huge difference in terms of the climate system. And as you can see, there is a huge implications associated with maintaining 1.5 if we can, or certainly not going beyond 2. Once we start to go beyond 2.5 to 3 degrees and all that stuff, we really have to worry about these feedback loops coming into the system. And these are the feedback loops we absolutely must avoid. So as I was mentioning, this is not first rodeo, and this isn't really about saving the Earth. This is about saving our human society. This is about saving human misery. This is about saving what we all consider a society that we all want to live in. And it's also about making sure that we're sharing the Earth's resources, not just with our human species, but also with all the other animals and plants and fungi, and there's a whole bunch of other ones we go into, but all the other amazing living life forms that we share this amazing planet with. So as far as I'm concerned, this is about human civilization and the need that we have to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to take care of future generations' viability and the Earth's ability to provide resources and provide resources for future generations. And it's these feedback loops that honestly scare the crap out of me, and why we need to put so much emphasis on keeping temperatures below that 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius mark. The first kind of feedback loop I did want to kind of go into, the loss of sea ice. We know that that's an issue because we have a lot less summer sea ice. When that summer sun beats down on the Arctic and there isn't any sea ice, you can imagine there's a very big difference between the albedo, or how much heat is absorbed by the surface of the water when it's covered in ice and white, versus when all the ice is gone and it's dark temperature, it's dark color, and all of the heat is absorbed by the ocean, which then further escalates the melting of the sea ice over the long term. So the more sea ice that is melted, the more heat the ocean absorbs. The more heat the ocean absorbs, the less sea ice we're going to have over a period of time. And this creates a vicious feedback loop of continual warming, and one that we must avoid as much as we possibly can. The one that is kind of mind-boggling in terms of how much we really want to avoid this feedback loop is the methane being released from the permafrost. There's heaps of methane that is stored forever. It's been, well, not forever. It's been stored for thousands and upon hundreds of thousands of years in our permafrost and frozen ice under the earth. And if that starts to melt, that's going to release a whole bunch of methane into the atmosphere. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. That's going to exacerbate the already kind of human-caused climate change that takes place. The other one I did want to kind of raise, and it's not so much, it's a feedback loop, but it's, again, the oceans do an amazing job of absorbing a huge amount of the carbon dioxide that both Earth systems and humans put out into the atmosphere. Their ability to absorb carbon will be reduced the hotter and the warmer they get. They can't absorb as much carbon dioxide. So for that reason, again, we really need, we can't rely on the ocean to be as big a sink in the future as it has been for us in the past. And then I think one of the things that's really, really critical is coral and kind of armored calcium-based ocean life forms. Coral and any kind of shelled life form in the ocean can't produce its shells when the pH falls too low pH falls below a certain threshold. And it's not a very thin, it's not a big threshold. I kind of jokingly call coral the kind of fainting Nellies of the ocean ecosystem, because they're a little bit like, they're kind of like the canary in the coal mine for the ocean ecosystem. They're like, oh, too cold. Oh, too hot. I think I'm just going to die now. Or it's like, oh, too acidic or too basic. I'm just going to die now. I just don't want to live like this anymore. So corals are very much the canary in the coal mine, and losing our corals in our marine ecosystems will not only be heartbreaking for people who love that ecosystem, and it's because it's really such a cool ecosystem, but it also would be heartbreaking because those coral reefs serve as the nurseries for a lot of fishery stocks. And there's still a very, very, very significant percentage of the population who relies on fish as their major primary protein source. And that's going to lead to some human resource issues with regards to fish stocks and how much it costs to secure fish sources. So those are some of the more kind of geological kind of, but it kind of makes you realize, just like, you don't, like, these are Earth systems that, whether you like them or not, doesn't matter. This is what happens, and this is the Earth system that you have to work. Just like you got to work with gravity, you may not like it, but it's there and you got to work with it. So I did want to kind of highlight, and a lot of times people are thinking, I'm going to highlight some of the individual actions that people can do, and then we're going to go more into the systemic changes of what we need to do moving forward. But certainly, Ottawa is the next municipality in Ontario with a home retrofit financing program. Yay! Which is helping to address the upfront capital cost barrier that many homeowners face as they want to make their homes more climate friendly. It also helps homeowners address the, where do I start? How do I know what's the right decisions to make for my home? How do I get the supports that I need to figure out what makes the most sense, both from a greenhouse gas perspective, as well as from an economic perspective, on moving my house to be a net zero emission building over time? So I didn't want to kind of highlight some of the main things that are a part of what makes for a climate champion home. But, you know, you can go into the kind of some of the kind of more traditional things that many of the utilities have done, you know, Energy Star appliances. If you're buying an appliance, make sure it's an Energy Star appliance. Another one, make sure it's an electric appliance. Don't buy any more natural gas or fossil fuel gas appliances. There was a recent study done, which I'm so glad that they started raising this, but there were air quality studies that were being done in homes that were natural gas cook stoves. And let's face it, all cooking produces particulate matter, which has air quality implications. But the researchers were utterly shocked at the amount of particulate matter in the air quality levels inside the home when they turned on their fossil fuel stove. And I know that the fossil fuel industry has done a pretty good job actually at selling people on fossil fuel gas as the way to cook. And one of the key things that they never bring up is the air quality implications associated with those fossil fuel gas appliances. So I would kind of give an idea on that one. Even I love cooking, but and yes, there's always this responsiveness with regards to, you know, the fossil fuel. You can turn it on and off if you want, but I had to move off to electricity when I bought my home and decided to get rid of my fossil fuel stove. There's also the elements in terms of, you know, okay, look, when you're looking at it, water, how much water efficiency is in things, looking at opportunities for water efficiency across your house in terms of both your appliances as well as the shower heads, all of those types of water generation, water efficiency opportunities. One of the things that's also particularly important, and this is probably the biggest challenge in a retrofit kind of retrofit of homes, is how to improve the building envelope. Now, we, you know, especially in a lot of the older homes that we lived in the city of Ottawa and the city of Toronto, and I live in the city of Hamilton, there's a lot of older homes. I know my home's about 100 years old. And so had to do a lot of gutting to get the insulation into the homes. And I was shocked at how little insulation there was when I did pull those walls up. But let's face it, we all know that undertaking an energy efficiency retrofit in a home is really, it's challenging and it's disruptive, especially when you're trying to deal with building envelopes. So keeping in mind, you only want to do this once. And when you do it right and get the help and support that you need to make sure your building envelope is done once, because you don't want to kind of have to do this on an ongoing basis. It's messy, it's disruptive. Get it done right, and get it done once. Then once you've done your building envelope, you have the opportunity to look at your mechanical systems. What are you going to use? And a lot of when I moved into my house, my air conditioner was relatively new. So I've got to kind of make the call on when do I cut my air conditioner off and get my air source heat pump so that I can kind of then have it so that I can switch over my air conditioner. Instead of buying another air conditioner, which I will not do, I will move that over to an air source heat pump, and then kind of use that air source heat pump for about 80% of my cooling, and then only use my natural gas furnace for the small amount of days when it's really, really cold, like over -20 or something like that. And then I'm hoping to get rid of that natural gas furnace very shortly thereafter when that contract ends with, I won't kind of bitch, but there's a contract that I bought in when I bought the house that I gotta stick with until that's over and done with. So then there's also the element, keeping in mind with the windows, a lot of homes really want to kind of advance their windows, and you absolutely critical. Doors and windows are really, really important in terms of the building envelope. They don't come cheap, and that's one of the areas, but they really do add a lot of property value improvements to the home. So you can't necessarily always expect windows and door improvements to pay back in energy savings, largely because they're pretty expensive. They will over the long term for sure, but where they really also help is really improving the property value of your home. So you got to kind of bring in a variety of different ways to build that economic business case for advancing these towards a net zero emission home. So there's a whole bunch of other areas in terms of it. Eventually, I would like to kind of highlight one of the first things a lot of people like to do is put the PV panels on their roof, because then they can show it off to the neighbors next door. And let's face it, we all love to do that. But that's probably the last thing you should do on your home in terms of advancing first things first. Using the energy efficiency on your appliances, building envelope, then mechanical system improvements, and then power generation on your home, if your home is situated in a location which is conducive to that. So I did want to highlight, so this is another area. This is again the issues with regards to what can the individual do versus what do we need to have governments help us change in terms of the systemic changes or the enabling factors that allow individuals to truly engage in this activity. For example, certainly I think COVID has been a little bit of an eye-opener for a lot of people in terms of how much communication and interaction can take place without actually leaving your house. So we should not lose that as a learning opportunity and as a climate change opportunity that we need to enact even more and more over time. But also we want to kind of look like, how can we, like, really, we've had an inverted transportation hierarchy where we put a lot of our resources and a lot of our planning to helping vehicles move as quickly as possible, and as many and as quickly as possible. We need to switch that transportation hierarchy and allocate more resources and more space to active transportation, to public space, to investing more in public transit. These are things that are beyond the ability of an individual to make change. This is how we build our communities, and where municipalities are absolutely critical to making the changes that we need to make. So again, I would kind of say, like, as a personal goal, a personal challenge, maybe try kind of like anytime you've got less than a distance of less than 1 kilometer, try walking it. See how that kind of works for you. Is that too long a walk for you? Is it something that you can bring into your life or not? Wherever you have anything in terms of less than 5 kilometers, do you have the ability to cycle it or e-bike it, to try and get that kind of element of that kind of reducing your need for single occupancy vehicles? As part of doing that, it also creates this onus that you're going to be more likely to advocate at the municipal level for more safe and dedicated infrastructure for being able to undertake active transportation, whether it be walking, whether it be mopeding, whether it be a scooter, whether it be a bike, whether it be an e-bike. And that is absolutely critical, because while you can do what you can, you're not the one building the bike lanes and the dedicated space for cycling and walking safely. That's the municipality, and they need to hear from their community that this is what they're hoping for and want to see in their community. It's really nice to see, it's been about, it's been about a decade where we've started as a province investing in our public transportation system. But we've ignored that public transportation system for like 2 decades before, yes, it's good that we started investing finally this last decade in our public transportation system, and that's absolutely critical. But we are also dealing with a system that has been not invested in for 2 decades before then, and it was just coasting by on its old investments. And so it needs a huge amount of influx of resources to build that public transit system, and build a robust one that's a viable alternative for enough people to single occupancy vehicles. I do feel like certainly the public transportation system has definitely gotten kicked in the gut during COVID, and it's been, and it will be a challenge to get people back into it. I just want to make sure my time. All right. So I did want to highlight many municipalities are moving from incremental corporate energy plans to developing their roadmap to building to net zero for certainly new builds and advancing their retrofits to new builds. And they're changing their policies. It used to be that it was corporate energy plan. Now we're seeing that a lot of municipalities are bringing their climate emergency declarations and their corporate energy plans together and making them aligned and turning them into net zero emission plans, which is fantastic to see. And these are some of the net zero emission municipal buildings coming into play. Yay! It's so exciting to see a whole bunch of them. I did want to kind of highlight in terms of, what is our community going to help us visualize? We're going to have more electric kind of public transit. We're going to have e-mobility. We're going to have more active transportation. We're going to have more renewables. We're going to have more efficient buildings. We're going to have more distributed energy resources, more green roofs, using that as a stormwater system moving forward. It's so important that we help people build the visual of what our new low carbon communities are going to be and how will they kind of function to support that. So this is the one from Energy Evolution, and this is the one from, and this is the one from Vancouver in terms of the mobility. How are we going to get to and from our different locations? I did want to kind of highlight as well, there is a huge disruption coming into our energy sector, and it hasn't changed in the longest time. So this won't be an easy disruption for the energy system to manage because they're so used to things staying the way they have been for the last 50 years. But we're moving from a system of big generation, big transmission, electrons flowing one way, to a system that's going to be very much like the internet in the exchanges and networks that are being developed. It's almost like we're kind of building a fungal network rather than this kind of, the one-way transition kind of thing. So it's going to be an internet of energy versus a big kind of monopoly of energy. And that's going to be extremely disruptive. So how do we manage this disruption coming our way? The first thing I'd like to say is the silos across the different levels of government, the silos within government, the silos across all of these different kind of fields of sectors of private sector, public sector. We cannot function, we cannot act on these opportunities to build our new low carbon communities without being very disruptive to these silos. The silos are not going to help us make this transition be smooth, and we really do want it to be smooth. So I always kind of like look at it, it's like, okay, the ones who can break down silos, they're the ones who are going to win this transition game. And we all need to do our part to kind of identify the silos that are not working for us and do our best to try and knock them down. And in addition, this isn't the federal government's problem to solve. It is not a municipality's problem to solve. This is all of our problems to solve. This is an all hands on deck, everyone in the boat and everyone rowing. This is not a like, oh, sorry, I'm going to leave that one. It's not going to be a little kind of a complaint section for me or anything like that. But I did want to highlight the kind of examples of like the provincial government emissions plan that came out there, which is really pretty much just saying, oh, we're going to do what the federal government pays for and forces us to do. And then that's our job here on the climate front. That is not a government showing leadership on the climate file. And we can't have that. We need to have everyone in the boat and everyone with their oars and everyone paddling. So I really want to kind of highlight an energy decision matrix. This is really what's critical to helping us make this energy transition. What we need to understand is, like in the past, the way we did energy planning, and it's particular within municipalities, the way they did energy planning was they kind of like knew a new development was getting place. They'd make one call the electrical utility, one call to the fossil fuel utility, and the wires and the pipeline would go in, and ta-da, their energy planning is done. That ain't gonna work in this low carbon world. We really need to understand and look at all the different permutations and combinations for how we can meet people's energy needs in the most cost effective and low carbon manner possible. And in order to do that, we need an energy decision matrix. We need to understand where are the energy efficiency opportunities. How far can we go with energy efficiency before we reach the law of diminishing returns? And it's just too costly after that. How far do we go with regards to just relying on the big generation and big wire solution? How do we kind of bring in the decentralized and distributed energy, district energy? Is it going to be geothermal at the building level? Is it going to be geothermal at the community level? Is it going to be a PV community system? All of these different options are coming available to us, and we need to understand which one works better for which community, because it's not a one size fits all. There is going to be different permutations that work in different conditions, and we need to kind of be able to compare and contrast across our different choices. We need to apply different lenses, because it's not simply only about economics, nor is it simply about climate. There's also resilience that we need to take into consideration. There's a market transformation and economic development opportunity that we also need to take into consideration in this energy decision matrix. Now, as part of I put as the wish list for what we would love to see as an energy decision matrix and a much more comprehensive and robust decision-making process. This is an example of what happens when you don't put in an energy decision matrix into play. And I'm going to give you an example. Presently, we're expanding the natural gas system in Ontario to communities that are only served on the electricity grid. And because of high electricity prices, they've decided that their solution for this is to bring natural gas into these communities or into these sections of these communities. So here's an example of a program they put in place. The phase 2 is only information I could find. There is a phase 1, but it's not as clear and transparent in terms of how much money went into that one. But for phase 2, an example is it's cost 234 million. It gets us 8,750 connections. That comes to about $26,000 and $742 what it costs per connection to that fossil fuel system. That connection to the fossil fuel system is expected to save between $250 to $1,500 per year. Now that comes to about 2.2 million at the lower end and 13 million at the higher end. It is not the lower end because we know not everybody's saving 250, and we absolutely know that it's not the higher end of the $13 million in energy savings, cost savings on the annual basis, because not everybody's saving $1,500 a year. So what that means is that we know that it's somewhere between $13 million and 2.2 and 13 million in savings. If you take that money back and consider it at 250, that comes to 106 years to pay back for that initial investment in terms of energy savings paying for it. If we know if it's $13 million a year, which we know it's not, same as it's not $250 a year, that comes to a 17-year payback. But if the best case scenario is a 17-year payback, are you saying that we don't have any better options for how we handle our energy system and reduce people's vulnerability to energy price increases? I think not. I think we can do better on this as part of Ontario's energy planning. I also wanted to kind of highlight that $234 million is being subsidized over the overall rate base in Ontario. At about everybody's paying a $1 per month for all natural gas customers, not just in those newly hooked up communities. Everyone's paying for that. So if we actually applied an energy decision matrix to this, how might energy efficiency or the use of heat pumps or virtual or net metering come into play? And how might that have been able to address people's costs and benefits and energy price increases over time? I think we can do better, and I think we need to do better in our Ontario energy planning. And I thank you so much for taking the time to allow me to share this story with you. And if there's any one thing I can do in addition to learning about the cool carbon cycle, I would also, if you haven't yet watched the Our Planet series from David Attenborough, it's fantastic. There's a scene right at the beginning, the introduction, where they talk about when humans went to the moon, and then for the first time when we turned our cameras around and looked at our beautiful blue planet from space and realized just how gorgeous and amazing this planet is, and that it's the least we can do to take care of it so that it can continue to take care of us. So thank you very much for your time.
Gabriella, that was great. Really enjoyed that. It's interesting, some of the things you brought up. I'll have some questions about them, but maybe I'll get to some of the questions that came in over chat. And one that kind of comes up a little bit all the time is, and it's relevant for tonight's discussion because of, I know some of the people who are on. A lot of people live in apartment buildings. So our congregation has had this climate as a congregational focus for over 2 years now, and everybody wants to help, and a lot of the ideas come in, and it's like, but I'm in an apartment building. Any thoughts about that?
So I would like when you're in an apartment building, your ability to change the mechanics or the building envelope, that's beyond you. That's not something that you can do. That's something that the property owner can do. And there's some ideas for how to motivate property owners to invest in energy efficiency that we'll get to. But there's still be a lot of behavioral things that you can do in your apartment building that can reduce the energy use on it, in terms of, you know, how high you keep the temperature in the winter time, how low, if you have control over your thermostat. You know, that you may not have that in an apartment building, right?
Yeah.
So that's one area where you can do it. You certainly do in terms of how, how you keep your windows open, or you don't, the efficiency of your behavioral things. There's how many you use your lights on or anything like that. Not, those kind of things you can do, the behavioral things. And there's small changes that you can do if let's say you have that, if you're not doing them already. If you're doing them already, then you've got that and tick that off your list on things that you can do. Then probably you might want to focus a little bit more on the transportation. What kind of transportation reductions opportunities are available to you? Do you have carpooling opportunities? Are you buying a new vehicle? Could you buy, if you're going to be investing in a new vehicle, can that vehicle be a used EV or a new EV? Or how can you make it the most fuel efficient choice that you have as part of that? How can you actually advocate at your local government in terms of more active and public space for being able to walk and hang out in your community outside as well? So that's other areas that you can do as in apartment buildings. I really think that this is where we really need government to come into play, because we have to change some of the systemic challenges that people are facing when they don't have control over their building. But there might be opportunities. For example, what about if all rental companies, or when they listed up their rental property, they had to disclose on how much the old utility bills were for that previous user? What if you could require that, and then the new person is looking for their apartment will have a much clearer understanding of what is the true operating cost associated with this, because it's not just about the rent you're paying, it's also about the utilities you're paying. And if you're going to be paying twice as much in one building than you are paying in another one, then you can have a little bit more understanding of where true cost associated with that apartment building. And that's something you can ask as the prospective tenant, but it's so much better when it's required that disclosure, energy use disclosure, be part of the overall rental process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One thing we have discussed a little bit is if you're in a, presumably most people are in a gas heated building, unfortunately, if it's shoulder season overnight, if you want to safely plug in an electric heater, that's probably much lower carbon heating compared to leaving the gas doing the heavy lifting heating. Because, for example, this time of year, there's not much fossil fuels being used to make electricity, and you're probably displacing a lot of carbon if you can just keep the place warm, say overnight or on the weekend with a bit of electricity. So that's one thing we've kind of come up with. But I agree with you, it's tougher when you're in a multi-res. It's hard for people in
apartments to have a lot of control over change. Yeah. The one thing I would say, one of the things I was joking around, I think it was a year ago or 2 years ago, I can't remember, on Earth Day, and I went to a party with my friends. It was probably pre-COVID days. Went to a party with my friends, and my friend was all proud of herself because she turned all the lights off around the house, and then she decided not to use the fridge for the beer, but she then decided that she was going to use the outdoors for the beer. And so I explained to her, I was like, actually, you know what? You're not doing the earth any favors here, because the electricity on a Saturday night is all probably either nuclear, hydro, or renewables, and it has no CO2 emissions associated with it. So you're better off just using as much electricity as you want during that time period. But you putting that beer outside the house and then opening up the screen door and closing it again, you're doing more harm than any of the light savings that you could have only done. Yeah. She's like, why don't we know this information? So there's an element of we need to understand our energy system, and we need to provide people the information so they understand how our energy system works, and not necessarily expect them to figure that all out on their own.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. There's questions always, we get questions about terms. So, and you might want to reach through the screen and hit me for the first one. But it's explaining net zero, and just briefly 1.5. And are they related to each other?
Oh, sorry, I'm just looking for the 1.5 and net zero.
Yeah.
Sorry, looking to kind of see that question. You mean if we keep it to 1.5, is that requiring net zero? Chances are, we're gonna, in order for us to achieve that 1.5, absolutely, net zero is absolutely critical. But net zero probably for 2050 is probably not going to achieve our 1.5. We are going to have to get net zero for 2030 or net zero for 2040 at the latest if we want to kind of keep under that 1.5 threshold.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I don't think we're going to make that change quick enough. Like, we've got to invest in making it for 2040, ideally, if we can, to avoid that kind of going over the 2 degree temperature mark. But I think ultimately what we're going to have to do is not only advance our net zero initiatives, but we're going to have to do regenerative agriculture. We're going to have to invest in Earth's ecosystems that can draw down carbon, really kind of, reforestation, kind of building up our soil health of regeneration agriculture. I think it's like, again, to me, it's all hands on deck. We can no longer only invest in mitigation. We have to build up our resilience, and we have to build up our regeneration of helping the Earth build up its ability to draw down carbon via its carbon cycle.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. There's a question here. Could you explain what CHP is? And I'll add to the question, are you a fan of it?
Me?
Yeah.
No, not at present. Combined heat and power, I'm not a fan of at present, largely because most combined heat and power means that you're generating electricity via the burning of fossil fuels. Yes, you're using that waste heat from that electricity generation from fossil fuels to heat the building, but it also means that you're creating electricity that's 100% dependent on fossil fuels. So there might be places where you need to use combined heat and power, but say, for example, you can't afford to do the electricity infrastructure upgrade you need, but then you really need to be identifying other opportunities for how you address the fact that you're relying on fossil fuels 100% in your combined heat and power, even if it is a little bit more efficient than a furnace or on that one, but it's still a very high carbon solution to meeting energy needs. And until we have a non-fossil fuel that can go into the mix, I think that we really have to rely on district energy, electricity systems like geothermal, or advancing electrification of home heating to truly achieve our GHG reduction targets that we need to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You'd mentioned how things are kind of siloed. Could you explain that a little more? There's a question about how are things siloed? What are these silos?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example on this one. This is right now, let's say, for example, Ontario has its climate change commitments through the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. But the one who manages our energy system is the Ministry of Energy. But they don't have a mandate for achieving Ontario's GHG reduction targets, despite the fact that they're the ones who control and manage our energy system. In addition, the ones who manage our energy system through the Ontario Energy Board, through the Independent Electricity Systems Operator, through Enbridge, does not also have a climate change mandate. So how can you not have a climate change mandate when you are running the province's energy system? That to me is mind-boggling, and it's the silos that should not be there. It should be an all-of-government approach, and that if there's a commitment made on the climate by the government, then all ministries need to be identifying where they have opportunities to advance this. I'll use another example of a silo that we're experiencing a little bit in the municipalities at present. Their municipalities are trying to advance thermal energy as part of a district energy system or individual buildings. But there's some municipalities where the source water protection folks are not allowing geothermal to be installed because they're concerned about water contamination. And their concerns on the water contamination are based on old geothermal technology that no one is ever using in the modern day. So they're basing their decisions on old information and old experiences and not keeping up to date on where the new technology is and how it functions and what are the risks and risk management strategies that you can put in place. So you have people in the municipality and the energy advancing it, and then you have folks in the source water protection saying, no, don't do it. And then that sends a very mixed message.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned like the geothermal. Where I am right now, which is my house, I have a geothermal system. There's a covenant against me having one. And I put it in before I was working for the city. I asked people at the city about it, and I had somebody at the city stick their neck out, just discreetly say, it's kind of just an old rule, Mike. Don't get too caught up on that. So,
Right.
ta-da, in it went, and I've been very happy with it ever since. And I'm out beyond the gas grid, so people have expensive heat if they haven't resorted to something like this. So, certainly haven't looked back on that one. It's interesting you brought up the expansion of the natural gas system in the middle of a climate emergency. How that had to go through the energy board. How did that get through? Because that's cross subsidization. It should be completely, it should be that costs accrue to the party getting the benefit. And I mean, I guess I'm asking a bit of a rhetorical question, but that one got through is just mind-boggling to me. Oh.
I'm pretty sure it was a political decision and not a bureaucratic decision.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, again, its structure of the fossil fuel subsidy and the rate base paying for the benefits of a small group of people is completely contrary to the modus operandi and what the mandate of the Ontario Energy Board, the way they see themselves and the way they're supposed to function, which is ensuring fairness in the pricing across our energy systems, right?
Yeah.
So that is one thing. So it had to be, I think it comes down to wanting to find simple solutions to complex problems. And this is just the way it was done in the past. And no one really wanted to give it a lot of deep thought about, we're going into an energy transition. We have a lot more opportunities than we had 10 years ago. Certainly a hell of a lot more than we had 20 years ago in how we meet our energy needs. But it was more like, that's too complicated. Let's just go back to the same old solution because that's what we did 30 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I'm happy to say that that was, again, just a wonderful session. And we're at the end of our formal part of our discussion. So thank you very much, Gabriella, for joining us this evening. And as I said at the beginning, we'll knock off recording this, and we'll just hang on for a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, and have some chit chat. Gabby and everyone, you have to ask me my map on the wall story.
Good. I was wondering about that since I'm such a map geek. Do tell us about the map on the wall. I can't see it clearly.
Well, so yeah, I used to. I see we're still recording. This. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, because there's a bit of self-incrimination that's going to happen here.
Well, Mike, can you just give us a minute, Mike, and we'll end recording.
Okay. I saw that. Oh no, maybe I didn't see that it's ended.